All right, so someone sent us some law textbook excerpts. You know how we do these deep dives. And get this. The first thing I see. A case about a contract, get this, scribbled on a napkin in a bar. And it involves a farm. Talk about burying the lead.
Oh, you've got to be kidding. That's amazing.
Right. Sounds like we've got a listener with some questions about, shall we say, the more creative side of contract law. But hey, that's what we're here for.
Absolutely. And honestly, that case is a perfect example of why contract law is so fascinating. It's everywhere, it affects everything, and it's not always as straightforward as you might think, like you said.
No kidding. Now, I know we want to get to the bottom of that barroom bargain, who was drinking what, who walked away with the farm, all that good stuff.
All right, got to get to the good stuff.
But your notes also mentioned something about descriptive and normative theories of contract law, and I gotta be honest.
Go on.
I'm more of a napkin contract kind of person. Can you break those theories down for me?
Yeah, of course. Think of it like this. Descriptive theory, it's like looking in a legal mirror, right? It just tells us what the current state of contract law is. What promises are actually being enforced in courts right now? What patterns do we see?
Okay, so it's just describing what's going on. Makes sense.
Exactly. But normative theory, that's where things get a little juicier. That's about asking, okay, but should these be the rules? Are they fair, efficient? Do they reflect, our values?
So descriptive is the what and normative is the why. Starting to get it. But let's not get too philosophical here. We've got a stack of cases to get through, starting with that napkin contract. Although, speaking of contracts, your notes also highlighted 4 main functions of contract law. Feels like it wears a lot of hats. Referee, interpreter, maybe even a mind reader.
You're not wrong to say that. It's true. Your textbook is spot on, identifying enforceable promises, filling in the gaps when things go sideways, interpreting those sometimes confusing terms, and of course, policing bargains to make sure no one's getting a raw deal.
Right.
Those are all key, really at the heart of what contract law tries to do.
So it's like contract law is stepping in and saying, all right, let's break this down, figure out what we're really dealing with here. And you're saying those 4 functions are how it does that.
Exactly. Like that first one, identifying which promises are actually enforceable. We can't just go around suing each other for every little thing.
Right. My friend promised to bring the karaoke machine to my party last month, let's just say. I'm glad we're not in contract court right now.
Exactly. There has to be a system, a way of deciding which promises, have legal weight. Contract law draws those lines. It says, okay, this kind of promise made in these circumstances, that's something we take seriously.
It's like contract law is playing detective, examining the evidence, deciding what holds up. But speaking of evidence, what about that gap-filling function? It seems a little optimistic to assume that 2 people can anticipate every single detail when they make an agreement, right?
And you're right. Life throws curveballs.
Yeah.
Contracts are made in the present, but they often have to deal with the future, and the future is full of surprises. Fires, floods, you name it. Contract law steps in and says, hold on, how do we handle this situation when the contract itself doesn't have the answer?
Okay, that makes sense. It's like having a backup plan, even if you didn't know you needed one. But even with those gaps filled in, won't there still be arguments about what the contract actually means? You know what I mean? People interpret things differently, especially when there's money on the line.
Absolutely. That's where that interpretation function comes in. Words can be tricky, especially in legal documents. Contract law gives us the tools to say, okay, based on the context, based on how these terms are generally understood, this is what we think they meant when they wrote that.
So it's like contract law is a language all its own.
In a way, yeah.
Okay, so we've got the promise police, the gap fillers, the interpreters. What about that last function, policing bargains? Sounds a little intense. Are we talking legal gladiators battling it out over broken promises?
Well, maybe not gladiators. But you're right. It's about making sure contracts are fair, that no one's using them to take advantage of anyone else. This is where we get into concepts like unconscionability, contracts that are so one-sided, so outrageously unfair that a court might just say, nope, we're not enforcing this.
Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff, and this is where our first case comes in, right? That napkin contract, the bar, the farm, lay it on me.
All right, you asked for it, Lucy V. Zimmer. This case proves that you never know where a legally binding agreement might pop up. Picture this. 2 guys in a bar having a few drinks. One of them starts joking about selling his farm.
Wait, hold on. This is already sounding familiar. I know this one.
Right. So out comes a napkin, some scribbled terms, and bam, a contract dispute is born.
And all because of a little liquid courage.
Yeah.
I gotta ask, They didn't actually enforce a contract scribbled on a napkin, did they?
They did. It all boils down to something called meeting of the minds. Did both parties genuinely intend to be legally bound by that agreement, napkin or no napkin? The court decided, based on the circumstances, based on all the evidence, that yes, they did, even though it started as a casual conversation.
Wow. It's a good reminder to be careful what you agree to, especially after a beer or two.
Right.
Talk about a cautionary tale.
Absolutely. And it's a great example of how those 4 functions of contract law we talked about, well, they come into play in the real world all the time.
So we've got our napkin contract, but you've got a whole stack of cases here. What other legal dramas await us?
Well, how about a case about a horse, a misunderstanding, and a pretty hefty boarding bill?
Okay, now you've got my attention. Tell me more.
This is Bailey v. West. And it takes us straight to those quasi-contracts we mentioned earlier. Remember, a quasi-contract isn't a formal agreement. It's more like a situation where one party would be unjustly enriched if they didn't compensate the other.
Okay, I'm following so far.
So in this case, a man ends up footing the bill for a racehorse's care, even though he claims he never agreed to buy the horse in the first place.
Wait, so he's stuck paying for a horse he never even wanted? That sounds incredibly unfair.
Exactly. And the court agreed. They said, even though there wasn't a traditional contract, the horse's owner couldn't just benefit from the situation without paying up.
Well, that's a relief. It seems like fairness plays a bigger role in contract law than I realized. So we've had a bar, a farm, and now a racehorse. Where does contract law take us next?
Next up, we're tackling the very intriguing case of Hamer v. Sidway. This one really digs into the idea of consideration, that both sides have to bring something of value to the table for a contract to be valid.
So it's like a legal barter system. I give you this, you give me that.
You got it.
Yeah.
Now, in Hamer v. Sidway, an uncle promises his nephew a good chunk of money if he refrains from drinking, smoking, swearing, and gambling. All until he turns 21.
Whoa, hold on. That's a long time to give up all those vices, especially for a young guy. So the question is, did the nephew actually offer something of value in return for the money? Like, does giving up those things actually count as consideration?
Right, that's the crux of it. Is it a sacrifice if it's good for you? The court had to decide.
Well, he is giving up something he's entitled to do, even if it's for his own good. Did the courts agree?
They did. The court ruled that giving up those legal rights, even rights to things that might be considered detrimental, still counted as consideration.
Wow. So even good behavior has a price tag in the world of contract law. Good to know. What other landmark cases await us on this legal journey? Okay, so from napkin contracts and horse boarding bills, we've been on quite a ride through contract law. Promises of good behavior. It's fascinating stuff.
It really is.
But this next case, St. Peter v. Pioneer Theater Corps, this one feels like it has a bit more, drama to it.
Oh, yeah, you're telling me. This is the bank night case, and it really highlights how even small actions can have big legal consequences. Imagine this. A theater's running this promotion, right? You could win a cash prize just by signing your name in a register and being there for a drawing. Sounds easy enough, right?
Yeah, sign your name, maybe catch a movie. What's the catch?
Well, here's the thing. The theater, they argued this wasn't a binding contract, not enough consideration. They said signing your name. Not a big enough deal to hold them to their promise of a prize.
Seriously, so they were banking on people just not claiming their winnings. So what happened? Did the court actually agree with them?
You might be surprised they didn't. They found that even those small actions, signing your name, showing up, they were enough to create a valid agreement.
Wow, that's wild. It really shows you've got to read the fine print no matter what you're signing. But there's one case in the stack that I really want to get to, Williams v. Walker Thomas Furniture Co. I've heard this one is a real eye-opener. What makes it stand out?
This one is definitely a big one. It's a prime example of how sometimes contract law has to grapple with issues of fairness. Even when a contract technically exists, Here's the situation. A single mother, on welfare, purchases furniture on an installment plan. Sounds normal enough, right?
Sadly, I'm going to guess it's not that simple.
Right. The contract had this clause. If she missed even one payment, the company could repossess all her previous purchases, not just what she was currently paying off.
Hold on. They could take back stuff she'd already paid for. Just because of one missed payment. That seems really harsh, especially for someone struggling to make ends meet.
Exactly. And this is where unconscionability comes into play. The court had to decide. Was this clause so one-sided, so unfair, that it should be unenforceable?
So it's like a legal timeout. The court steps in to say, hold on, this doesn't seem right.
Exactly. And they had to consider all these factors. Individual responsibility, sure, but also the potential for exploitation. Did the company know about her situation? Should they have known? In the end, they ruled that the clause was unconscionable, and they refused to enforce it.
That's huge. It really shows that contract law isn't just about blindly upholding agreements. Sometimes it's about making sure those agreements are actually fair. And speaking of finding a balance, this next case, Jacobs and Youngs v. Kent, feels like it gets at that tension to sticking to the letter of the contract versus the bigger picture.
It really does.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, imagine this. You're building your dream house, right? And you're very specific about every detail, down to the brand of pipe you want for the plumbing.
I know the feeling.
Right. Now imagine they finished the house, but they used a different brand of pipe. Functionally, it's identical to the one you asked for, but it's not the exact one you specified. Can you refuse to pay for the entire house?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I mean, on one hand, they did deviate from the contract, but on the other hand, that seems a little extreme, right? Withholding payment for the whole house over one detail.
Well, this is where we get this idea of substantial performance. Did the builder essentially meet the terms of the contract, even with that one deviation?
It's like saying, okay, you didn't follow the recipe exactly, but the cake still tastes good. So who did the court side with? The heartbroken homeowner or the slightly off-script builders?
They sided with the builders. The court found that as long as the builder made a good faith effort to fulfill the contract and any changes were minor, didn't really impact the value of the project, then no, you can't withhold payment for the whole thing. Of course, if they'd used like cardboard tubes instead of pipes, that'd be a different story.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's a difference between a substitution and a total construction fail. But this next case, C.V. Leonard, this one feels like it's more than just a substitution. We're talking some seriously unstable ground, right?
Now, this case, it takes us into the world of construction. And let's just say, it's not always pretty. Imagine this. You're hired to build a building, but the ground, it turns out to be quicksand. And that wasn't mentioned in the contract. Whose responsibility is it to deal with that unexpected surprise?
Quicksand. That sounds less like a building project and more like an Indiana Jones movie. So the question is, does quicksand count as one of those unforeseen circumstances we were talking about earlier? Did the builders get a pass?
You would think so, right? But, surprise, the court didn't let the builders off the hook. They said the builders should have anticipated the possibility of difficult soil conditions and factored that into their costs. You know, basically they were saying, if you're going to be in the business of building, you'd better be prepared for whatever the earth throws at you.
Wow, that's a tough lesson. A good reminder that contracts aren't just about what's written down, they're also about understanding the risks that come with the territory. Speaking of unexpected situations, the title of this next case, Taylor v. Caldwell, it definitely sets the stage for some drama. What's the story here?
All right, picture this. You've booked a beautiful music hall, right, for a series of concerts. Contracts are signed, tickets are printed, everything's set. And then tragedy strikes. The music hall burns down in a fire.
Oh no, that's awful. Every musician's worst nightmare.
Right. No one's at fault. It was an accident, but now there's no music hall, no concert, and a whole lot of disappointed concert goers.
Talk about a showstopper. So how do you even begin to sort out the legal mess when something like that happens? It seems like an impossible situation.
Right. And that's where this idea of impossibility or frustration of purpose comes in. Basically, if something happens that makes it impossible to fulfill the contract and it's no one's fault, then both parties might be excused from their obligations.
It's like that old saying, we make plans and then life happens. So in this case, did the court agree that the situation was truly impossible?
They did. The court recognized that the very foundation of the contract, the music hall itself, it didn't exist anymore. So it was impossible for either party to hold up their end of the bargain. Contract dissolved. Everyone had to move on with heavy hearts, probably, and a few insurance claims.
Wow, what a wild ride. It really shows you how contract law, it's not just about enforcing things. It's about adapting to situations, finding fair solutions when things go wrong. Okay, we've got one more case to unravel here. Van Wagner v. S&M. What's the story?
This case, it's all about a billboard. And not just any billboard. We're talking a prime location, visible to thousands of people every day, advertising gold.
I bet that contract was worth a lot. So what happened? Why are we in court over a billboard?
Okay, so the owner of the building decided to sell. The new owner, they wanted to terminate the billboard lease. They said they had the right, and well, they probably had big plans for that space, but Van Wagner, the company leasing the billboard, they argued that the value wasn't just about the money, it was about that location. The visibility, the brand recognition they'd built up. They said money couldn't really compensate them for losing it.
Interesting. So it's like they were saying, you can't put a price on this. So we've got this classic standoff. The building owner's like, it's just business. And Van Wagner's saying, no, this is more than that. Have the court settle that one.
In the end, they sided with the building owner, but not without considering those arguments about the billboard's unique value. They agreed that the location was special, but they said it was still possible to put a price on that loss. Lost revenue, potential for future earnings money could compensate, they said.
So even a one-of-a-kind billboard can't escape the cold, hard realities of contract law. It seems like there's always a way to put a price on things, even those that seem priceless. We've covered some serious ground today, from napkin contracts and quicksand to good behavior and tragic fires. We explored how contract law really does shape our agreements, our industries, and even how we think about fairness and justice.
It's been quite the deep dive, and what's amazing is that this is just the tip of the iceberg. Contract law is constantly evolving. New cases, new technology, even just shifting values, they all shape how these principles are interpreted and applied in the real world.
That's what makes it so fascinating. It's not just some dusty old set of rules. It's dynamic. It's relevant.
Exactly. And it's why it's so important for everyone to understand, even in everyday life, signing a lease, making a purchase, even just shaking hands on a deal. Knowing the basics of contract law can help you protect yourself, make sure your agreements are fair and enforceable.
You said it. It's like having a superpower, being able to decode these agreements that shape our world. Well, that's about all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the wild world of contract law.